Congratulations, Mr. Trump.
As Trump returns to the White House, will he confound the skeptics and bring peace, not new wars, to the Middle East?
If you're looking about peace efforts and tying people together business-wise and humanizing people between countries, that's what Trump did.
But can the U.S. afford more military action when Americans are facing serious challenges at home?
I don't want to hear someone telling me that the president and his policies were going to help lower the price of these high groceries when the president never talked about the average everyday American.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. With Donald Trump now back in the White House, America is grappling with sharply contrasting visions for its future, with fears of Democratic backsliding at home and growing uncertainty about the United States' role on the international stage. How do Americans on opposite ends of the political spectrum see the next 4 years under President Trump? And how can we expect Trump to act globally?
Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time.
I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily.
But we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. The Panama Canal was built for our military. It was vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China! Canada and the United States. That would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and it would also be much better for national security. We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name.
Shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and it would have never happened.
If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
So, can President Trump deliver on his campaign promises to end wars? We're now joined by Republican Congressman Rich McCormick, who serves on the Armed Services Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. Congressman McCormick, you're a staunch Trump supporter. Should the world be worried about the next 4 years?
No, I think the world should be reassured. You notice that nobody invaded Ukraine when Trump was president. Israel was not invaded when Trump was president. China was not threatening Taiwan when Trump was president. Qasem Soleimani was dealt with when Trump was president. We had relative peace in Afghanistan when Trump was president. Those things haven't happened in the last 4 years. And if you look at foreign affairs, we've actually been in turmoil. If you look at what's happening in Germany, South Korea, France, Italy, you name it. The world's going to be a better place when we have more stability from strong leadership. I've always said strength through peace. Weakness always results in war if you study your history.
But Trump has already started acting like a cowboy on the world stage. He says the U.S. should take over Canada, the Panama Canal, Greenland. These are not words that are going to reassure your allies, are they?
This is just posturing to really leverage things that we need to get done. And what we need to get done is make sure that we're strategically secure. This can help Europe, by the way. You don't want Russia and China having bases in Greenland. You want to have a friendly participant relationship with countries that need us just as much as we need them. You don't want to have Panama controlled by China. We need to make sure that we secure our future. And Greenland is very important to that. Greenland's working with us. If you listen to their population, if you listen to their leadership, they want to have a strong relationship with the United States. They want to have bases there. They want to make sure that they're showing up their trade in good ways. This is going to be good for the world as we move forward. We certainly don't want to have Canada as the United States. That's not what Trump's getting at. He's being tongue-in-cheek when he says that.
Well, to be clear, Trump did not rule out the use of military force to take over Greenland, whether he was joking about it or not. But you're a member of the NATO Parliamentary Affairs Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. Trump's past criticisms of NATO raised eyebrows globally. How much can your own NATO allies depend on the United States' commitment under an unpredictable Trump second term?
If you look at what NATO's done, since Trump was putting pressure on them to all raise their percentage GDP investment in their own military. They've done that since he's been out of presidency. He was almost a prophet when it talks about NATO and what they're supposed to be doing. If you're going to have NATO as an organization that we lead because we have more votes than the rest of NATO combined, just based on population. If you look at GDP, we have $27 trillion economy. Europe has a combined $20 trillion economy. If you look at what we bring to the table to stabilize a region that we're not even linked to geographically, that's a good thing for Europe. That's a good thing for NATO. The fact is that they needed to step up. They needed to do their share because it's their back door that we're protecting.
And many of the NATO members have stepped up. Will we continue to see President Trump sow doubt about the importance of NATO? Could he threaten in his second term to withdraw from NATO altogether?
It's not about threatening them. It's about calling them to the table and being accountable.
As a member of the Armed Services Committee, you criticized the Biden administration for showing weakness and appeasement toward Iran. Do you believe that Trump should go to war with Iran? Do you believe that Trump will be dragged into a war with Iran?
Iran is going to determine that. If they continue to supply weapons for our enemies that are used against American troops and American ships, I think that they need to be dealt with. I mean, nobody thinks it's okay to produce weapons, drones, and other things that are going to kill Americans.
Well, what do you mean by dealt with? Do you mean that the U.S. should go to war with Iran?
I'm a Reaganite. I remember when Libya was messing up, there's far less than Iran is right now. And what did Reagan do? He went after Muammar Gaddafi. He killed his son. He put Muammar Gaddafi in hiding. And what happened within about a decade, Muammar Gaddafi came to the table and said, look, I want to be friends, because that region understands strength. That mentality of a terrorist organization, when you say, you know what, I'm going to bully you and I'm going to bully you until you roll over. If you deal with the bully by punching him in the face, if you're producing weapons that are used against our allies.
Congressman, with respect, though, this is exactly the kind of cowboy language that shows the kind of arrogance of the United States and that has made you so many enemies around the world.
Let's talk about that. When Reagan became president, did it help us or hurt us internationally? I'd say it helped us. You can call him a cowboy all you want, but it brought the longest lasting peace in that area since you and I have been alive. That's being a cowboy. You can say that, but look, people understand strength.
But Reagan didn't start so many wars. In fact, he put pressure on one of your closest allies, Israel.
Look at what Iran's doing. Do you think that Iran's you're going to back down if we're soft on them? That just got tried by both Obama and Biden. Whenever we show Iran that we are weak, they actually ramp up their efforts. They produce more weapons. They divest all over the world in terrorist activities. You can't tell me that.
But that's not supported by the evidence, Congressman. You and I both know that. In fact, when you were speaking with Iran indirectly, when Iran was engaged in a nuclear program which the United States under Trump in 2018 violated, which the United States violated by withdrawing unilaterally from, the IAEA itself, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Congressman, the IAEA, in its first quarterly report after the US pulled out in May of 2018, concluded, and I quote, Iran is complying with its commitments under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It also said that Tehran was implementing the additional protocols which provided significant access. So if the stated aim was to put an end to Iran's nuclear program, weren't you better off speaking to them than threatening them with war?
So I'm going to put this up here, and I want you guys to take a good view of this. This is what happened during the Obama and the Biden administration as far as nuclear enrichment that can be used for nuclear war. Since Obama and Biden were in, you can look at the ramp up of the number of enrichment facilities that go to 6% uranium. You can't tell me that's not violation. It's plain and simple, it's math.
It's not for you and I to say. The IAEA itself, again, in another quarterly report, Congressman, concluded that Iran was complying with the agency.
So you tell me.
And that enrichment, I'll just end on this, and that enrichment uranium stockpiles remained within the limits. That's what they found.
They're ramping up for war. You can see it. You cannot tell me that they're a peaceful regime. You cannot tell me they're not exporting terrorists. You cannot tell me they're not exporting weapons to Hamas, Hezbollah, to Houthis, to Russia, to China. Tell me that they're anything other than evil. Tell me that.
It's not for me to tell you whether they're evil. The question I am asking you,
it is exactly what it's about.
the question that I am asking you is, should the United States go to war with Iran, Congressman, on whatever premise? And we know what happened when it went to war with Iraq.
I'm answering your question.
It was at a cost of $2 to $3 trillion to the U.S. taxpayer.
You want to answer your question?
I just wanted to finish my question, Congressman.
Go ahead.
Can the United States afford another war, this time with Iran? We saw what happened in Iraq. $2 to $3 trillion was spent. Countless, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were killed. It led to the creation of ISIS, Daesh in the region, which did not exist. Are you willing to take another similar risk today with Iran?
So why did 9/11 happen to begin with? And where are we in the world when we step back and we say, you know what, do whatever you want. And you look at what Iran does around the world. If you're going to bring weapons that kill Americans and kill allies and disseminate weapons throughout the world that are going to do more and more harm as you get more and more advanced technologies, if you're going to do that, you're already at war with us to begin with.
Congressman, with respect, Iran had no connection whatsoever with 9/11. If anyone did, it was one of your close allies in the region.
So are we talking about 9/11 right now? No, I'm talking about the shipping lanes where we had American ships attacked with weapons produced in Iran. I'm talking about American troops that were killed on foreign soil with weapons produced in Iran. I'm talking about Israel, weapons that were produced in Iran. I'm talking about Ukraine, weapons that were produced in Iran.
You mentioned Israel. Let's talk about Israel. As someone who served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as someone who currently serves on the Armed Services Committee, will you vote to continue giving Israel unlimited billions of dollars and weapons in aid at the expense of stability in the region, peace in the region, and the damage it does to America's reputation?
So when you talk about unlimited, that's not a fair assessment. Everything's limited in the United States assessment. If you look at what we're debating right now, there's plenty of people in the Republican Party that they're very much isolationists. If you look at, there's way more support from the Democrats than the Republicans for foreign aid. But when you talk about Israel, it's a pretty united front. It's not just President Trump, it's most of Congress. When you talk about Israel and a stabilizing force in that region, if you look at somebody who you can rely on to actually stabilize that region as the one democracy that's going to have fair elections and actually going to have vacillations in their opinions.
You said, Congressman, that it was not unlimited aid to Israel, but we're talking about billions of dollars that have been given to Israel since last October alone. And when you consider the outcome, the outgoing Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said just a few days ago, quote, that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost. Can you continue providing Israel with all this money, given the outcome?
Done by Blinken, too. And that's the funny thing. We always say, oh, look, the Democrats, they've done such a great job. No, they haven't. It's during the Democrats that we've had this problem. And the Abraham Accord was the most successful legislation we've ever put forth on the world. If you're looking about peace efforts and tying people together business-wise and humanizing people between countries, that's what Trump did. We had relative peace in the area during Trump's administration. And if you want to talk about peace, once again, I've been in the Middle East. I spent a lot of my career in the Middle East. I will tell you one thing that region understands is strength. They do not understand pacification. They do not understand appeasement. All they do is get worse. If you want them to behave, you have to show them you're willing to punch them in the mouth when they misbehave.
It's extraordinary to hear you say this, Congressman. And this is at a time when the incoming president is saying that he will pursue peace and not war. Yet we have prominent members of Congress like yourself still talk in these terms.
No, that's peace. Peace to strength.
Threaten war. Threaten force.
Peace. That is peace.
How is that peace, Congressman?
Because that region does not understand pacification. When Obama gave cash to Iran, when Biden freed up cash for Iran, what was it used for? For war against everybody who's peaceful, to propagate terrorism against people who are otherwise at peace. Israel was not in Hamas territory when they were invaded. They weren't.
Are you saying that the United States will and should continue to give Israel billions of dollars, regardless of what the outcome might be? And you
keep on saying billions of dollars.
And you, in this process, will be violating your own laws. Are you willing to continue doing this?
Well, first of all, what laws are we violating?
Well, we're talking about the Leahy Law, for one, which prohibits the United States from providing weapons and military aid to any country that is blocking humanitarian aid and that is potentially committing war crimes. And there's plenty of evidence that Israel has been.
So you could say there's plenty of evidence, but I've seen how the United Nations propagates false claims all the time.
I'm not talking about the United Nations, Congressman.
Let me finish. And if you look at how Israel has actually gone out of their way to get some of the supplies to these areas that have been isolated, and I get it. It's war. War sucks, by the way. And it's a good thing that war sucks, or we become way too fond of it.
Congressman, this isn't just about United Nations report. There's been reports from every international organization, human rights organization, including many Israeli. But beyond that, it's your own government reports to Congress. In fact, just last May, a report concluded that US weapons had likely been used by Israeli security forces in a way that is inconsistent with international humanitarian law. We're talking about your own government reports, Congressman.
So have those same organizations, this is an honest question, have those same organizations spoken against Hamas for using hospitals as bases for munitions and military supplies? Because I haven't heard that. Have they talked about Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS and these other organizations for their horrible conditions of treating children and women? Have they did? Because if they're not talking about that, they're not being even-handed.
But these entities are not committing a genocide, Congressman.
This is not an even-handed conversation. This is a biased, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-American discussion from the United Nations and those people who don't like what we stand for.
All right, Congressman Rich McCormick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
A recent poll shows that Kamala Harris paid the price for not breaking with former President Joe Biden over the genocide in Gaza. 29% of Americans who voted for Biden in 2020 and backed someone besides Harris last November said ending Israel's violence in Gaza was their top issue. So, how do Democrats view Trump's new presidency? And what will the legacy of the Harris-Biden administration be? Brandon Scott is the Democratic mayor of Baltimore. He recently featured in a documentary called The Body Politic. It shows him campaigning on reducing gun violence through an approach that goes beyond tougher policing. He also went viral with his reaction to Trump's election victory.
This country does not deserve black women or black people, but specifically black women. And I want the vice president to know that her and her team did everything right in the right way.
Mayor Scott joins us now. Mayor Scott, we just heard your reaction to Donald Trump's election victory and Kamala Harris's resounding defeat. You said that America does not deserve black women. You also said that Harris ran a flawless campaign, that she lost because, quote, this country is still steeped in racism, sexism, and misogyny. But is that really the main reason she lost?
When you look at the tail of the tape, when you look at what these individuals, the president and the former vice president, stood for, when you look at their records, when you look at what they were talking about on the campaign for the average American person, right? We all know, no one wants to say it, but we all know what truly happened there. And it just shows that we've come a long way as this country, but we still have even further to go when it comes to treating women, people of color, especially black people, and especially black women, with the respect that they deserve.
Of course, for anyone watching events in the United States over the last few years, racism is a real issue in the United States. But can you really say that Harris lost because America is still steeped in racism, as you've said? We know that many Democrats, for example, chose not to back Kamala Harris because of the war on Gaza. Isn't that a reality?
I think that there's some of that. I think that is also, in my opinion, overstated. And I'll just say it this simply. If the former vice president was a white man running against another white male, she would have been the president.
You say she would have been the president, even though we know that people chose not to vote for her, not based on gender or, as you say, racial identity necessarily, but because she chose not to change course.
No, I think that we assume that's the reason. We don't know, right? I think that when you go back and look, one, we know in recent years, American polling has been something that is unreliable. We have to look at this election in its entirety and understand that, listen, and also it's very important to me to say that these single lane voters, we have to grow and mature in that way, that we're not voting for or against or not voting at all on one issue, because clearly we have to think about how everything that person is going to do is going to impact our life.
But can you still say that she ran a flawless campaign? Or would you now admit, for example, that some of these voters who decided not to back the Democratic Party's candidate didn't because the Democrats once again took them for granted and refused to listen to their concerns?
No, I think that I would say that I'm not changing that viewpoint, period. When you look at that, I don't want to hear someone telling me that the president and his policies were going to help lower the price of these high groceries when the president never talked about the average everyday American. When you dig deep into those issues and not try to paint these things as some of these folks are saying out loud it's about the grocery prices, or it's about this, or it's about that. And when you start to ask these folks the deeper questions about, okay, well, what's the president's plan on that, or what's his party's plan on that, and you realize that they don't know because they never heard it. You then get back to the issue that we know is under the surface, but right there in your face if you look.
You talk about the price of groceries, yet we know despite the rising price of groceries and all the other problems the United States is facing, the US, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, they've all chosen to give Israel $18 billion in military aid. And just as they walked out the door of the White House, another $8 billion. How do you justify that?
Well, that's not for me to justify or not, but I think that the average American person is smarter than to be able to make a decision based on one thing that an administration is doing or helping many thousand miles away. I think that we have to give the American people a lot more credit than that. This election was not about the war in Gaza, right? And we know that far too many people have died there. We're grateful that there now has been a ceasefire, but we cannot allow anyone to dance around the realities of this race, and that it was not the war in Gaza that decided it.
You say it wasn't the war in Gaza, but you've got all this huge military spending given to Israel at a time when Americans need health care, when there's so much that needs to be invested in American cities like Baltimore. You have an additional $183 billion spent on the war in Ukraine. And yet you're saying that you don't want anyone to dance around the issues, and you bring it back to identity politics.
Well, it's not, I mean, this is not identity politics. This is American politics, right? I think, again, we'll bring it back. When you pull back the lever, when you look and see what this country was like and what was going on in this country when the former vice president took office, we're talking about a country that was being ravaged by a pandemic that the president didn't take seriously. You're talking about an economy that was tanking because of that. You're talking about cities that had rising homicide and crime rates. And then what you saw from the former vice president and the former president is historic investments into that. You saw historic levels of low unemployment, especially amongst African Americans. You saw historic drops in crime in cities around the country, including the one that I am mayor of, because of those investments. You saw record growth of small business, especially when you're talking about Black communities. So that's the reality as well. And I think
yet many African American voters walked away from Democrats.
I would just say that when you go back and look at the numbers, and one thing we're not going to do on this show with me on here is put this on Black people. Black people overwhelmingly voted for the vice president when you go back and look at those numbers. And now we can see with the president in office how many of them are hoping that they don't go through with all those tax cuts for the wealthiest folks in the world, and they don't forget about all of those poor people and lower class people that voted for the president who don't even look like me, who may live in the Midwest, who need those services and that funding that the U.S. government helps provide, who are afraid that it's now going to go away after they voted against their own best interests. And when you
But hold on, there's been a lot of fear-mongering among Democrats that a Trump administration is going to lead to chaos, instability, and the erosion of democracy. But if that is the case, how do you explain that so many people voted for Trump?
People vote against their own interests all the time. Elections aren't always about what's actually real. Elections are about how people feel. Elections are about what people take in from the media and what they're able to digest. We don't yet know what the president's second term is going to be like, but we know if it's going to be anything like the first term, then that's not fear mongering. That was actually truth being spoken.
Mayor Brandon Scott, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
As America navigates a politically charged landscape, it is clear that the challenges facing its leaders are as vast as they are urgent, from systemic inequalities and racism at home to a polarized vision for the nation's role globally. For some Democrats, like Mayor Scott, Trump's America First slogan should mean focusing on domestic problems and tackling the root causes of violence, inequality, and racism. For Republicans like Congressman McCormick, it's about reinforcing America's leadership role on the world stage through the threat of force. Donald Trump is known for keeping people guessing, and that is creating nervousness around the world among friends and foes alike. That's all for now from me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.